Please join us in a spirit of meditation, reflection, or prayer as we deepen into our service and share our opening words for this morning by Ian Riddell. Come one, come all. Come with your missing pieces and your extra screws. Come with your hard edges and your soft spots. Come with your bowed heads and upright spines. Come, all you flamboyant and drab, verbose and quiet, fidgeting and lethargic, all you with large vision and tender hearts, all you with small courage and tender fears. Bring your lisp and your stutter and your song. Bring your gravel and your drawl and your lilt. Bring your anger and your joy and your righteous indignation, misfits and conformists and everyone in between. Come into this space and be welcome. Bring who you are. Bring where you've traveled. Bring what you long for, and let us worship together. Today, the empty chair is for all the people we sorely missed over the holidays. We join Unitarians in India and Japan and Unitarian Universalists in Georgia and Edmonton in lighting our chalice this morning. We are in good company. If you have your chalice with you, I invite you to turn on your video to share while we light them with these words by Martin Luther King Jr. Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. We kindle our flames this morning for the redemptive power of love. If there are children nearby, please join us for our story this morning, Empty Pie by Derek Munson.
And now, Enemy Pie, written by Derek Munson and illustrated by Tara Callahan King. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a tree house in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood, right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when I struck out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline and I wasn't even invited, but my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood, but as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse, where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too. But he knew of a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. "Tell you how? I'll show you how," he said. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. "Enemy pie," he said, satisfied. You may be wondering what exactly is in enemy pie. I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret, he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. "I will tell you this," he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kind of things, disgusting things, would I put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he needed those. I gave him the gum I'd been chewing on all morning. He gave it right back to me. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. As far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good. But Dad was smart. "If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it," he said. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang, and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked like plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out, or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. "There's one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary. But it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross. Then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on the door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. "Can you play?" I asked. He looked confused. "I'll go ask my mom," he said. He came back with the shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. "You boys stay out of trouble," she said, smiling. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighbor girls, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course I couldn't tell Dad that, since he had worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy wanted in... "Can we go in it?" he asked. I knew he was going to ask me that. But he was the top person, the only person on my enemy list, and enemies aren't allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me to throw a boomerang, and he did have me over for lunch, and he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. "Okay," I said, "but hold on." I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him, but when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him. But somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite, too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut the pie into 8 thick slices. "Dad," I said, "it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood." I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy, but Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. "Wow," Jeremy said, looking at the pie. "My dad never makes pies like this." It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. "Jeremy, don't eat it! It's bad pie! I think it's poisonous or something!" Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. "If it's so bad," Jeremy asked, "then why has your dad already eaten half of it?" I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. "Good stuff," he mumbled through a mouthful, and that was all he said. I sat there watching them eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing, Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or the breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy.
When I worked as a hospital chaplain, I dreaded walking into rooms where the patient or someone with them, before they would talk to me, would administer what I thought of as the test. Sometimes it was about my credentials, sometimes it was about my experience, but most often it was about my faith. What religion was I? Or did I understand Jesus in a particular way? Well, you know, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and those questions undermine my ability to connect with those people. I felt like I always failed the test. I was surprised to learn then that my Christian colleagues disliked the test as much as I did. They too felt like they always failed it. So if it wasn't about being a Christian, what was it about? My supervisor suggested that they were asking if they could trust me. Well, that puts a different spin on it, doesn't it? If they came right out and just asked their real question, "Can I trust you?" how would I answer? I think I would need to ask some questions of my own to know where their concern was coming from and what they needed from me. And you can see the difference there. It put me into a place of curiosity rather than inadequacy or defensiveness. My supervisor called this listening for the music underneath the words. I think about this a lot in our very divided country, and I return often to a particular episode of a radio program called On Being. That's hard to hear, On Being, with Krista Tippett. She was interviewing theologian Karen Armstrong, and I want to share the part of the interview that captured my attention. Karen Armstrong says, "I was at Oregon State University, and it was a conference called God 2000, and it was a wonderful conference. We had lectures from Jews, a rabbi, a Muslim scholar, and we were all asked to say what we had learned about God, and it was wonderful. People were asking profound questions about the nature of prayer, spirituality, listening to very, very religious ideas. Very pluralistic ideas were coming out, that nobody thought that their tradition alone had the right answer, the monopoly of truth. And then we were on the final panel, and suddenly erupted in the hall a fundamentalist who started to shriek at us incoherently. What I could make out was that he was saying that Jews and Muslims denied Jesus, and therefore they were going to hell. And all of those of us who sided with Jews and Muslims were also going to hell, and it was evil. And you couldn't hear much because he was so incoherent with rage and despair. What I could hear, however, was the note of pain in his voice. This was not just some loony. This was somebody who was suffering and in pain and felt profoundly threatened by what we were saying. And the point is that we, 7 of us on this panel were all articulate people. We'd all been talking nonstop to each other and to the audience for the last 2 days. We were utterly struck dumb. None of us could say a word. We felt utterly winded by this assault. Even me, and I should have known better, because I'd just finished my book on fundamentalism. I couldn't think of anything to say. Eventually, this man was hustled out, and the moderator said, "Well, I wish we could have talked to him, because he is a part of this conference. He's a part of this conversation." But somehow we couldn't talk with one another. He was incoherent, we were struck dumb and useless, and this is the problem that we're facing. And then Miss Tippett, the interviewer, says, it says something about the limits of words in dialogue. And Miss Armstrong replies, yes, it does. And I think that what we've got to do is listen to the pain of the other. You could hear the note of pain, and you can hear the distress in it. When we look, say, at fundamentalist doctrine, we've got to see what pain and fear lies at the root of this, because as we've learned to our cost, they're trying to express, often very badly and in noxious ways, anxieties and fears that no society, no government can safely ignore. And so our future, I think, depends on learning to listen. As mentioned in this quote, Karen Armstrong said all of this in the year 2000. And I wonder if society and the government did in fact go on ignoring the pain and fear at the root of fundamentalism, which has brought us to our current state of affairs. And as we become less and less inclined to listen to that pain and fear expressed so noxiously, I wonder what that will create in the future. In the lead up to the election, I would often read about how Democrats just wanted violence and were promoting it, and how Democrats couldn't stop lying, about how Democrats wanted to destroy democracy, and other similar statements. And I would be shocked. First of all, I didn't know any Democrats that were sanctioning those ideas. And second, everyone knew that in reality, that is what the other side was doing. And that thought would pull me up short. Could it be that most Republicans feel equally innocent of all the malice assigned to them? In individual conflict that is broken down, the parties stop speaking to one another. At that point, we often start assigning motive and creating a backstory. So-and-so is doing what they're doing because XYZ, and clearly that thing they are doing just proves the narrative I have created. Everything they say and do, in fact, confirms my bias. One of my oldest friendships is on the rocks right now in just this way. She said something inappropriate about one of my children, and I let it go, but a little later in the conversation, she apologized for it. I thanked her and said I didn't think she would appreciate it if I had said a similar thing about her child. Later, she rescinded her apology and doubled down. And then she created an entire backstory and assigned motive to me to justify why she was the wronged one in this scenario. And she stopped talking to me after a while. In turn, I have created a story about how she always does this. And of course, I have theories about why. And I suspect that neither one of us is right. In seminary, I had an assignment to have a difficult conversation with someone. The structure of the assignment excluded everyone I knew, so I had to find a stranger. A congregant was kind enough to go out on Facebook and find me somebody to talk to. We figured the fastest way to a difficult conversation was to find a Trump supporter. We met twice at a coffee shop. We agreed on essentially nothing. We had both come to the conversation, however, determined to be civil and to listen. All his friends, family, and news sources back up everything he believes, and so do mine. It is as if we live on parallel planets. And I still don't know what to do with that, but it felt worthwhile to listen. Because I live in my happy bubble, I don't have a lot of opportunity to listen to people who see the world so differently. In the lead up to the election, I wanted to go door to door and ask people with certain yard signs how they saw the world. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, COVID stopped me from following through on this. For decades, I've wanted to offer the Human Library. This is an international program where you can check out a person for in-library use only. When you set it up, you find people willing to talk that are part of groups your community struggles with. Sometimes it's what they do for a living, like a sex worker or a judge. Sometimes it is religion, or people with a different skin tone, or politics, or gender identity, or sexual orientation. Whatever biases need to be lifted up. Fear of tokenizing and of things going horribly wrong hold me back. The idea, however, is that members of the public can sit down with one of these people and ask whatever questions they want. And the point is to make us human to one another and to connect us and to maybe change some hearts. Another chaplain supervisor was fond of saying that mass shooters are asking the same questions we all are. Do I belong? Am I loved? We may not want to go there. And that is the sort of scenario that makes us question our first principle about the inherent worth and dignity of every person. But I suspect she is right. Very uncomfortably, we might wonder about the people who stormed the Capitol as well. Although not on that scale, I suspect all of us have some pretty maladaptive techniques for asking these questions. Do I belong? Am I loved? And likely we have some equally maladaptive means of finding that love and belonging. And some healthy ways. I'm glad you're all here, for instance. In the days ahead, much healing is needed. And I'm wondering if it's time to start listening to those who feel like they have lost the battle for the soul of this nation. I know we are all really struggling with that, vacillating between wanting to heal and also not wanting to authorize evil in any way, shape, or form. What do we do with knowing that, as Karen Armstrong says, there is a lot of pain that engenders fundamentalism, and also not wanting to say that putting children in cages or choking Black people to death is no big deal. Evil is a big deal. There's a Buddhist concept that I am not sure is really a Buddhist concept. I read about it in a young adult novel once, and I can't find it anywhere else. Maybe the author just wanted to lend some clout to the idea. But I like it nonetheless and try to live into it. The idea is that we have to keep offering people the opportunity to do the right thing and to expect that they just might this time. I wonder how that fits into healing our nation. And of course, I want that for myself. Every time I fall short, which I did at least 7 times in this past week, I want to be offered another opportunity to do better. I want people to believe that I am capable of doing better and giving me the grace and space to learn. I also think about the world wars. The winners of the First World War, if there is such a thing as a winner of a war, imposed harsh penalties on the losers after the war. And many believe this contributed to creating a fertile ground for the Second World War. After the Second World War, we had the Marshall Plan, which was a plan that created a better path forward for the losing side. And this is credited for creating some peace in the world. I think there is a lesson here to be learned and applied in these times. Also, I wonder if we tried to understand and respond to the pain, if we might serendipitously eliminate some future evil as well. If I'm not hurting and ignored, maybe I don't have to lash out as much. Maybe I can be a little more generous of spirit if my needs are being met. It's a tall order. If love demands that we ally with the most vulnerable, some things are unforgivable. But as Gandhi, or possibly just his biographer Louis Fisher said, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. So you may have noticed that this sermon is bouncing from thought to thought. I am wrestling with justice, mercy, compassion, accountability, evil, and equity. How do we make all of that fit together? If you have children, you may have received the advice to condemn the behavior but not the person. And I guess I'm just trying to sort out how to do that in our divided country. We will do what we always do, try to navigate paradox as best we can and figure out a way forward in love. Can we hear the music under the words, the need for love and belonging, and respond to the pain underneath the noxious words and deeds, even as we are careful not to authorize evil? That isn't easy, is it? It's a good thing we have our Unitarian Universalist religion and one another to help us figure out how to navigate this world. I hope that you'll help me and help one another to do that. May we be wise and loving in all that we say and do. So we'll extinguish our chalices with these words, by the Reverend Amy Zucker Morgenstern. In every person we meet, especially those who cause us discomfort, we find an opportunity for us to grow, to learn, to go further along the path of transformation that is our purpose in life. Every single one is our teacher. May the next week bring you many such moments of meeting that help you become the person you want to be, and may you welcome them with joy.
When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, you hold my hand. Will you be strong for me? Sing to me quietly. Will you share some of your stories with me? If you will show me compassion,